you all for attending. Welcome to our monthly webinar series and to our October webinar, Improving Collaboration with SharePoint. My name is Brian Murphy, the Marketing Specialist here at DICES. We're so pleased to have Gary Blatt here today. Gary has been working in the IT industry for almost 30 years. He's been working with Microsoft for about 15 years pretty extensively. You'll notice he has experience in implementing, developing, and architecting deployments, and is Microsoft certified in SharePoint and Office, and is a Microsoft certified trainer. For those of you who are not familiar with DICES, we are Digital Intelligence Systems, LLC. We are an IT consulting and business solutions company with core services in IT staffing, finance and professional services, ERP services, and infrastructure support services. I'm going to go ahead and let Gary take it from here. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and as we move through the webinar, we'll have Gary field them all at the end. Gary?
Thanks, Brian, and welcome everybody to our webinar on improving collaboration with SharePoint. I wanted to briefly go over the agenda for the hour. We'll go through some brief introductions, as Brian has already touched on. We'll jump right into SharePoint. What is it? Some of you may be familiar with the product, some of you may be working with it, some of you may have no idea what it is. So I do want to give a high-level overview of what the product is and what it's capable of and what it can be used for. The top-level functionality will dive a little bit deeper and talk about the different areas of functionality that SharePoint can provide. And then we're going to talk a little bit about ECM. Enterprise Content Management is one of the biggest drivers for the SharePoint product, although it certainly does work with other technologies as well. And then we're going to take a look at document management. We'll be doing some hands-on with that, taking a look at how collaboration can be done for your users within the SharePoint environment. In addition to that, the Office integration aspect of that, SharePoint is a Microsoft product, and as such integrates very tightly in with the Office suite, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And we'll take a look and see some demos of exactly how it works with that. And then we're going to wrap up the session with what we term a real-world problem, and that's managing corporate lookup data. And we're going to take a look at how that's a common scenario across a lot of enterprise environments and how SharePoint can help us take a look at that. And then at the very end, as Brian mentioned, we'll have some time for the Q&A. So from an introduction perspective, Brian already gave me a wonderful introduction, but I did also want to point out the big claim to fame I have. I do live in the state of Florida, and as you can see, my license plate is SHRPNT. So I am the SharePoint guy in Florida. Moving on, we do want to talk about what is SharePoint. So, essentially, the idea behind SharePoint is to make it easier for your workers and the people that you employ to work together, to collaborate. They are able, using this platform and this tool, to set up websites, to share information, manage documents, publish reports, and a host of other pieces of functionality. The tools for the collaboration included within SharePoint really allow an organization who implements it correctly to reduce their labor costs and increase productivity. And while on one hand that sounds like a bunch of lip service, the reality is that again, when deployed correctly into your environment, it has a lot of potential to say, I don't need as many IT people potentially. I don't need as many administrators. I don't need as many developers. They won't go away. You'll still need them, and they'll be doing maybe some more sophisticated things. But SharePoint really does enable the empowerment of the information worker. Therefore, some of your lower labor costs can actually be brought into doing some of the tasks that would normally be covered by the higher labor cost. Increasing productivity is also a very real piece of SharePoint, in that by providing the proper interfaces for people to work together more efficiently, it's going to allow them to get more work done. So while it does sound like a bit of a sales pitch, it is actually quite feasible to hit both of those goals with the SharePoint tool. Prior to starting the seminar, we polled the attendees as to if they were using SharePoint, and if they were, what version they might have been using. You can see that approximately half of you responded that you're using SharePoint 2010, which is the the current released version. There's still another almost 25% that aren't using SharePoint at all, and then there's some that are using the older versions of SharePoint as well. To add to the mix, we have SharePoint 2013 on the horizon. The beta of that is already out. Microsoft's planning on releasing it sometime later this year or the beginning of next year, depending on their schedules. And some of you who are not have not purchased SharePoint yet and are currently trying to make that purchase decision, you may want to consider just going with the SharePoint 2010 version for now. Working with a brand new version of a released Microsoft product isn't always a smooth transition. Nothing against Microsoft, but it may be something that the 2010 product is very capable and is still a very viable version until they get the kinks worked out of the 2013 version. So we're going to now talk a little bit about the top-level functionality. Again, we'll dive deeper into some of these as we go throughout the session today. But the very first bullet that we have listed here, collaboration, this is the big kahuna. This is the big piece to SharePoint, allowing your information workers and allowing your other workers to efficiently work together, to collaborate. But, an example of that might be a team of 3 to 5 people that are working on a document to prepare a client proposal. It could be something that's going to take a period of days, weeks, or even months potentially to work on, and it could be multiple documents involved in it, an Excel spreadsheet, maybe showing some budget information, a Microsoft Word document. There could be a bunch of different pieces to this proposal that they're working on. SharePoint really does provide the ability for them to easily collaborate without stepping on each other's work, and make sure that they're bringing all of that work together in a cohesive format. We'll also talk a little bit about ECM, the Enterprise Content Management, the pieces of that as it relates directly to SharePoint. ECM is a pretty big topic, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's managing the content at the enterprise level. What are all of the different pieces that an enterprise needs to manage? There's data, there's documents, there's other types of information that may be stored in a multitude of different environments and platforms, and ECM is about working efficiently with all of that. And SharePoint certainly steps up to the plate and provides the ability and the possibility to have that one-stop shop or portal capability where even though you do have all of these other legacy applications and LOB or line of business applications, SharePoint can be that one-stop shop by bringing together all of your ECM needs under one portal. In addition to that, we'll also take a look at the Office integration aspect where, because SharePoint is a Microsoft product, they built into it a lot of integration into the Office suite, which would be the main 3 tools for that is Office, is Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So you'll get to see a demo of how it integrates in with those, allowing you to work with SharePoint data right from within the Office suite as well, using that familiar interface that you're used to using anyway. So the next piece that we want to take a look at would be search, and search. Search plays a huge role in the SharePoint environment. Typically, when as an experienced SharePoint resource, when people come to me and say, well, what is SharePoint about? My short little answer to that sometimes is, there's 3 tenets to SharePoint. Where do I put my stuff? How do I find my stuff? And how do other appropriate people find my stuff? And as simple as that sounds, those are some of the major business needs in a lot of enterprise environments that are looking to reduce the amount of time people are spending processing documents and sharing them and looking for them. So search plays a huge role in SharePoint in making it easier to find the information as opposed to going out maybe to a network file share and drilling down through 20 levels of file folders looking for a particular document. Next we have what's referred to as services within the SharePoint environment. These are optional things that you can choose to enable or disable as is appropriate for your environment. For For instance, Excel Services is an additional piece that comes with the enterprise version of SharePoint that allows you to host Excel spreadsheets right from within your SharePoint environment, giving the users all of the full interactivity as if they were actually launching it inside of Excel, but with all the security of knowing that you're not exposing the actual Excel spreadsheet, the actual file, to the users. So it is in a read-only fashion. Another major piece of functionality that SharePoint can certainly address is BPA, or Business Process Automation. This goes by many other titles as well, but essentially what we're talking about is evaluating the processes that your organization uses typically on a daily basis and automating them. So as an example, it could be as simple as saying, well, we have an expense report that every time an employee incurs expenses and needs to submit that for approval, there's a process they go through. In some organizations, this may be sent out to a third-party service, to supply that functionality. In some cases, it could be as simple as having an Excel spreadsheet that they mail around to, several different people, not necessarily in the most efficient way. One of the things that SharePoint can provide is that workflow automation, that not only can it provide an actual form online for them to fill out that has full data validation and connection into the other Office pieces, but as well can be connected to a workflow that says when somebody submits this particular form, automatically send an email to their manager, creating a task for that person, and letting them know that they need to review this expense report. It can support multiple levels so that after that particular manager approves it, it can go on to, say, the VP of accounting or finance, whoever the next person in the chain of approval might be. So it can support multiple approvers, not just a single one. In addition, it has the abilities to have business logic as part of that workflow that says, oh, if the dollar amount's more than $50,000, don't ask for a manager approval. Go ahead and send this right to the VP based on the dollar amount and things like that. So while those are certainly simple examples, SharePoint does have the capability of providing a high degree of automation. Another example is that some of you may be familiar with Lean Six Sigma, which is a process of evaluating existing processes and coming up with more efficient ways of executing them. And one of the things that we frequently do with SharePoint in organizations that are using the Lean Six Sigma is to have them create that future state map, which is an output of Lean Six Sigma, and we take that and produce that functionality directly from the future state map right into the SharePoint environment. So BPA, the workflow, all of those individual pieces are certainly another major part of SharePoint. The next bullet here, business intelligence. This is another one that's become somewhat of a buzzword over the last couple of years that might not be entirely clear what it means to different organizations. At the highest level, what we're really talking about is the ability to present data and other information in a very organized way to the appropriate audiences. So for instance, when an executive or a C-level person logs into their SharePoint environment, they may go directly to a page that was set up just for them that has multiple dashboards on it showing them sales for the year and other metrics that are important to them. The nice part about the BI within the SharePoint environment is that not only can it provide that high-level reporting, but directly through the interface it can provide that drill-down capability. So if an executive comes in and he sees some particular figures for the quarter or for the year and is curious where they came from, he can click right on those and drill down into seeing which divisions produced more of the revenue based on the sales data available. So the dashboarding capability, scorecards, these are some of the other pieces. We have status lists, which literally have a traffic light scenario that have a red, green, and yellow light. So based on the metrics that they're pointing at, the dashboard can display either the red light, meaning that it's below whatever goal was set for that metric. Green means everything's fine. Yellow means it's in the warning zone. So again, it's about presenting that information to the appropriate audience in an easy way to allow them to get to the data that they need. The last bullet here, the social networking features. A lot of organizations hear that word social networking and they immediately say, well, no, I don't want Facebook in my business. That's certainly inappropriate. The good news is, though, that there are business-appropriate social networking features that SharePoint supports, and we'll take a quick look at some of them a little bit later in the seminar. But at the high level, some of those social networking features includes things like blogs and wikis. And while at face value you may not think that that's a business use, being able to take a wiki, which is just basically a bunch of entries that can be edited by all of the users, that can be presented as a knowledge base to your end users, where people go in and ask questions and they get answered, and it builds up a searchable knowledge base for your users. So other things like tagging and so forth, while again are very popular out in the social network space, can also provide additional value within the business environment by allowing users to tag the information and then make it easier to find it via those tags. So I wouldn't necessarily discount social networking as a non-business use case. So this is a slide that comes directly from our friends at Microsoft. I included in the presentation just to give you, a slightly different perspective. This is Microsoft's perspective on the 6 main areas of functionality. So I'm not going to go into deep detail on each of these. We will be covering a good majority of these as we go through some of the other demos. This is mostly here as a frame of reference for people that may be referring back to the slide deck at a later time. So when we talk about collaboration specifically within the SharePoint environment, there are certain assets and certain entities that are available to us as we build these collaborative environments for our users. So there's a term referred to as team sites. This is just a label that Microsoft has put on a specific type of website within the SharePoint environment that allows a team of people to work together. So as your organization considers how they want to work with SharePoint, one of the options is to create a hierarchy that may be based on your org chart potentially, or some derivation of that, that says, well, let's set up one website for finance, and within that finance department there may be subdivisions or regions that you want to set up subsites for. So as you look at how you want to set up your site hierarchy, there's decisions based on, do I want to present a team site? Is this for a group of people to work on? Or am I creating a site that's just presenting information out to the organization? For instance, a marketing site. And when it comes to your marketing department, you may make decisions based on, well, I need one area where my marketing team can work together, where nobody else can see what they're working on. That's kind of their work in progress area, where they can collaborate and work on the brochures and other marketing materials. But as they're ready to share that with the rest of the organization, SharePoint provides publishing features that says, well, take data and documents and information from this area and publish it out into another area of SharePoint. In other platforms and other environments, that would certainly require getting IT involved and getting a lot of potentially even developers involved, whereas in the SharePoint space, those are things that can be set up and automated to allow the users to have complete control over that. And Team Sites is one of the vehicles for doing that type of thing. A team site can have many different pieces to it. Let me give you a brief look at what a team site looks like. So this screen that we're looking at here is an out-of-the-box SharePoint site. When we say out-of-the-box, we're just referring to the idea of when SharePoint is installed and you create your very first site, we build these templates that come with SharePoint, and this is the team site template. And as it comes out of the box, you can see that there's different components to it. There's this image over here. That comes from Microsoft. Obviously, you would probably want to replace that, or maybe decide that you don't want any image at all. The nice thing about this team site environment, or this template that was created, is that it's very easy to edit. And while you would not give this capability to all of your end users, creating some type of chaotic environment where everybody's making changes, You can assign appropriate responsibilities to site administrators and designers and other individuals to allow them to come in and make changes. So again, instead of having to turn back to IT and go through the process of wanting to change some things on the site, we can, as I'm logged in as an administrator and I have the permissions, I can click on this edit page, which allows me to get into the environment. And here, this is just free-form text. So I can come in here and start adding some text without having to send this content or this request out to the IT department. The appropriate people can make those changes. We have all of the formatting functionality similar to Word and some of the other Office products. You'll notice that there's some options over here to check it out. That would be if you wanted exclusive rights to edit it while allowing other users to view it, but nobody else to make changes to it. We have that checkout capability. And as we make changes to it and then save it, that then gets exposed to the users who would then, on the page refresh, see my updates instantly. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in deciding that we want our page laid out a certain way, we want certain information on this page. While Microsoft gives us a good starting point, you have the flexibility of coming in here and making many different kinds of changes to it. So some of the things that can be part of a team site are document libraries. And what those are is it's an area to store documents, but it's also an area to collaborate and have situations where you can have different versions of documents being maintained, and you can check out the documents to have exclusive rights to edit it. There could be workflows associated to it. There can be metadata, which is just essentially additional data associated to those document libraries, allowing your users to not only track more information, but make it easier to find those documents. And then we have some of the other pieces of functionality, or assets as we call them. Calendar functionality, email, forms, wikis. These are all additional pieces of functionality that we get access to within the SharePoint environment. And just to give you a quick demo of how that looks, as an administrator, I can go into the SharePoint site and tell it that I want to add a new asset or a new component or a new piece of functionality. And as you can see here down the left side, there's different types. There's libraries, there's lists, there's pages, and then there's even site templates that we can create and add, and many different categories. So if I decided that I wanted to add a contacts list, I would just select contacts, give it a name for my contacts list, and say create. And it went out and that easily created what we call an out-of-the-box contacts list. If I were to click Add New Item, here is my data entry screen automatically built for me by SharePoint with these default columns in it that allows me to enter in the data, save it, edit it, share that data. I can attach file attachments to it, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in getting things up and running very quickly. But as you look at this contacts list, you may say, well, there's a lot of information that's being captured there that just isn't applicable. Again, as an administrator, you can have the flexibility of coming into your SharePoint environment for that specific list, and while not impacting any other copies of a contact list, for this one, we can come in and say, we never use faxes anymore, so I'm going to take this fax number field, I'm going to hit delete, I get a warning, of course, and when I say OK, that has now been removed. So now for this My People contacts list, the users will no longer be prompted for that. So again, it gives you a lot of flexibility in working with the data and these changes that can be made very easily without having to go through a whole 3-month IT project based on gathering requirements and some of the other things. Not that that's not appropriate for some of the larger changes, but for some of these minor changes, it makes it very, very easy to work with the information in that manner. So getting back to our slide deck here. We have the team site example, which we just spoke about. And I did want to talk a little bit about ECM, or that enterprise content management. If you're not familiar with what it is, and or as the slide says, what drives the need for it, these are some of the problem spaces that I have listed here on this slide. Reusing information is difficult. Whether it's the same form that users are filling out from scratch each time, or they don't have a form to use, so each time they go to submit a particular piece of data or something for client usage or consumption, it doesn't have any consistency to it. Where ECM, or the Enterprise Content Management, can help regulate some of that. The inability to protect sensitive information, that's all about security. SharePoint has a very robust security model that has been approved by most of the federal government, including the Department of Defense and DHS and several of those other three-letter initial organizations up there in DC, that has a very strong security model that can meet their needs as well. The efficiency in collaborative authoring. Again, the inefficiency of a team of people emailing versions of documents around to each other multiple times obviously is not a very efficient way of doing that. With SharePoint, we store the document inside the SharePoint document library, and we share links to it instead of sending that document out to multiple people constantly. There's several other pieces here about the ECM. There's regulatory pieces depending on the type of business that you're running. You may have government regulations that say that you must keep documents online for X amount of years. There could be things related to privacy if you're related to anything in the healthcare organization. All of the HIPAA information and complying with those privacy policies is certainly a major piece of that. And in bullet number 3 here, the multiple publishing channels, frequently in the past, prior to SharePoint, there were a lot of challenges in, a user just wants to make a small change to some of the content, available on the website, and they'd have to go to the webmaster or the IT department or a developer to have that done. Now we can empower the end user to do some of that themselves. So there's certainly a lot more to that. Feel free to read that slide at your leisure. Some of the other pieces of the enterprise content management I wanted to briefly mention. E-discovery is a big legal thing where a company may, either from some legal action, come to you and say, we need every single piece of information you have on XYZ, whatever that might be, a particular product or a particular client interaction. The ability to go into your information base and get all of that information, identify it, tag it, and move it off to the side and lock it down is an important piece of e-discovery. And that functionality is built right into the SharePoint environment, where with proper configuration you can do what's called a legal hold on a group of data. Auditing requirements are capable in SharePoint so that you know who's touched the document, who's downloaded it, who's edited it, all of those types of things that sometimes fall into that regulatory area. This next bullet really talks about ECM in a nutshell, is these 5 steps: the capturing of the information, the management of it, the storage, where do you put it, the preservation, how long do I have to hold on to it, and delivering it to the appropriate audiences. That's a big piece of the ECM. Then we get into these 3 other high-level categories of document management, record management, and web content. And while each has its place within the ECM space, today we're going to take a deeper dive into document management. So this slide addresses some of the different pieces of functionality that SharePoint can directly address when it comes to document management. So you'll see the repository in the middle of the slide, where you may have different areas of documents that are stored. SharePoint provides the ability to manage these documents via templated work, via metadata, the ability to check in and out using versioning, working with different team sites, bringing in data from your file shares, scanning directly into SharePoint is also another nice piece of the document management. So I did want to take a dive into that for you. We're going to go back up using my breadcrumb trail here to my home page, and you'll see that there's a reference to shared documents. And as a matter of fact, when you hover over it, you'll see the little help text tip that pops up that tells you this is to share a document with the team by adding it to this document library. So when I come to my document library, I have a link right here that says Add Document. This gives me the capability to upload a document that I may have already previously created. But another major usage of SharePoint is training your users to go to SharePoint and create the documents from within the SharePoint interface. And there's a lot of pros and cons to that. There's certainly some user adoption issues around that as well. But let me just give you a brief demo of what that looks like. So the user would go to the document library that they've been assigned to store that particular type of document and click on New Document. And when they do, it automatically launches Word because that's the template that was used for this library. You could use an Excel template or a PowerPoint template for other libraries. You can have multiple templates available for the users to select from in a drop-down list. So there's a lot of flexibility in configuring this for your end users to get that maximum flexibility. So here I am in my Word document, and I have the standard Word interface, with my ribbon menu across the top up here, and the content area down here. But now here's a different thing, and this is only available from within SharePoint. This is referred to as the Document Information Panel, or DIP. You know how we love our acronyms in the computer field. So the DIP provides additional data entry fields that were created within the SharePoint environment, as opposed to putting in your Word data, your Word document, saving that, and then putting in the properties into SharePoint. You can do this all in one place. So here I have a manager column, and it's in the drop-down format. I can pick from a selected choice. I can type in my text, and as I do, when I'm done with it, I can then exit out of Word like I would normally do, and of course it prompts me to save my document. Now the difference here is that the File Save dialog box that you're about to see in just a moment that comes up, instead of just pointing to my local C drive or maybe a network file share, because I launched this from within the SharePoint environment, what I'm going to see here is the actual SharePoint document library that I launched it from. And I can just go ahead and hit save, and by default it saves it directly into that SharePoint library without the users having to think about where they need to save it. So they do that thought process up front, and now I have this document as part of my SharePoint document library. If we hover over the name, we can see that there's a drop-down box, and I have many different options here to interact with that. I can choose to edit it. I can edit the properties associated to it. So not the actual document, but here's those properties. Now in this case I've assigned just these couple properties, but you can easily create additional properties, making it easier to not only track this information but find it later by doing a search that says, well, show me all the documents that are in this site across multiple libraries where the manager is equal to Sally, as a quick example of that. So there's many different ways of working with it. Now, when I go to work with the document, I also have the option of checking it out. And when I do that, it puts a little indicator on the icon here letting people know that it's been checked out. If another user comes along and decides that they want to work with that document, they'll receive a message telling them that it's checked out to so-and-so, and you feel free to open up a read-only version, but you cannot make any changes to it. So it has that check-in, check-out functionality automatically built into it. Another nice feature is what's referred to as version history. Now, I haven't turned that on yet, so I'm going to go into my site administration settings here, and I'm going to turn on versioning at the major level and tell it to only keep the last 3 versions. There's several other options here that you can explore. But for right now, I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit my document. I'm going to make another change to it. And that way you can see how the versioning works. From the perspective of once versioning has been turned on, it will automatically version that as 1.0, 2.0, and so forth, allowing you, so I can put in some changes here, save my document. Notice the message that it gives you, because I had checked it out, it's reminding the user that other users can't see these changes I've just made until I check it back in. Do I want to check it in now? I have the option of saying no, I'm not ready to share this with the rest of my team, but I need to save it because I have to leave for now. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you work with that. You also get the ability to put in a comment every time you save a version of it for documentation purposes. So now, when we go in and we look at our version history, we can see that we have the original version that was saved at 12/32 today, but then I have the 2.0 version. I could decide to come back here to the 1.0 and restore that back to the current version so that if somebody made changes or I accidentally deleted a whole section, I can actually roll back to a previous version. Again, this is the very high level of document management in SharePoint. There's a lot of other flexibilities. When we look at the library menu, you can see that there's workflow capabilities built into it, the ability to export to Excel, to open this right from within Windows Explorer. There's a lot of integration functionalities built into this directly. But at a high level, that is your document management in SharePoint. So we talked about from the library functions, the check in and out and the versioning. Authoritative source. This is a very important part of document management, having one valid and recognized copy of that document, as opposed to, well, Bob emailed a version last week, and I don't know if that's the same one that Sally worked on. SharePoint allows you to maintain that authoritative source and have much more control over it. You can maintain permissions and security across it and say, only certain people should have access to this document library. For instance, sensitive HR information can be stored where, only the appropriate people within HR can see that. So there's, a lot of capabilities there. The business process automation, we talked about that briefly earlier. Managing the routing of documents. So one of the nice built-in features of SharePoint is the ability to create what's called a drop-off library. Instead of the users needing to make the decision, well, I don't know where to store this document, they just told me to put it in SharePoint. Well, we can create a drop-off library that allows the users to put it into that drop-off library, and based on rules that are set up by the site administrators, it can then say, oh, well, this document has this particular property, let's go ahead and move it to another document library. Workflows can be created and maintained by people who aren't developers. It's all point and click, and you can archive documents, the integrated search, the ability to find the documents easier, and the integration, you saw that document information panel. These are all pieces of that document management. And you can see the document management menu has a lot of different options on it that allow you to interact with your documents in many different ways. So you saw a quick demo of the document information panel. There's also Excel, PowerPoint, and Access integration. You can actually approve documents, workflows right from within your Office applications, and there's other levels of integration. This last piece that we're going to talk about is this common scenario that I've seen across a lot of organizations in the years that I've been doing IT, and that is, we have this concept of lookup data, whether it be a list of clients and maybe a client code or a client number or other data associated to that client, or project numbers, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of data that's used repeatedly in potentially multiple locations. And while there could certainly be a master version, that data stored somewhere, frequently there's also additional copies. Well, HR went out and made their own copy so that they can add some things that are specific to HR to it. And this other region over here added some stuff or deleted some stuff, and now you've lost that concept of a master version. The challenge comes in keeping the list in sync and current, whereas you get all these multiple versions and people are wondering why, well, how come this client code is different or this information isn't the same when I go to look it up? So, this is something that we run into all the time. SharePoint can add huge value, not only by providing that central location where that lookup list is maintained in SharePoint, but it's easier to manage and consume. There's a service within SharePoint referred to as the Manage Metadata Service, which has an administrative functionality to it. And once that administration piece is set up, end users can go in and add items. Now, in the case of the MMS, they're referred to as terms. So the MMS has what's called a term store. And let me give you a quick look at that. We jump into central administration, and of course this would only be accessible by your farm administrators. Over here we have what's referred to as our term store. So I created a term set called offices, and then within offices I have a zone, and within zone I have these particular items, and then you can see within Americas I have different sections. So you can see that the hierarchy can go down as many levels as you wish, whatever makes sense for your particular organization. We also have the ability to assign administrators to it at the term set level as well as down at the individual term level, so that instead of a network administrator being responsible for maintaining all of this, we can set it up so that individual users with the proper training can come in and access just this part of central administration to manage the term set so that they can make corrections, additions, deletions, whatever is necessary to maintain these. So once you have these set up, they make it very easy to consume those. So I want to show you a quick demo of that. Here is a list in SharePoint. Now previously we were looking at a library that stored documents. This is what's referred to as a list, and the only difference being is that there's no document associated with the row of data, but we can track any individual information that we see fit. When I say add new item, I get my data entry screen, and take note that on both Office and US State there's an icon to the right of the box. When we hover over it, it says browse for a valid choice. So when I click on that icon, this is the term set from what the screen you just saw previously being exposed to the end user at whatever level is appropriate. So in this case, I exposed it at the zone level, allowing them to drill down and pick at whatever level is appropriate for them. So maybe I'll just pick Fairbanks here and say OK. For US State now, this is going into the same exact term store, but now down at the North America level, because none of the other zones are appropriate when I want to pick a US state. So therefore, I've controlled that environment. Now, another nice feature, besides just clicking on this and drilling down to a list of choices, is it has what's called suggestions. So as I start typing, you can see as I started typing the letter A, it showed me all of the 8 choices in my list. I typed a B, there are no Bs, but as I type an M, it'll show me all the options. And if there's multiple choices, you can come down here and pick that. So the idea here is that we want to make it easy for the users to do data entry. We want to make it easy for to validate the data that they're putting in, but we also want to make it easier to maintain. So as your needs change and somebody within the department that's responsible for maintaining this says, oh, we now have a new zone, I can just come here and say, well, I want to create a new term. And that new term might be new stuff, whatever that might be. And for that new term, I can maintain information about that down to the level of who's responsible for it, who's the main contact for it, and other information that allows us to easily maintain this without, again, having to put in major requests to IT. IT is busy enough doing plenty of other things. We're not going to run out of work, I promise you that. But again, this just goes to show even more that flexibility of SharePoint in delegating out that responsibility appropriately and empowering different people within your organization to do different collaborative functionalities in a very efficient way. So this pretty much wraps up. I did have, bear with me a moment here, I think I had 1 or 2 other slides that I've already covered most of the materials in that in. These are here mostly for reference materials. I did want to make one other brief mention. If the data that you're doing this lookup with is already maintained in, say, a SQL Server database or an Oracle database or some other proprietary system, in some cases, instead of having to take a copy of that and put it into SharePoint, it can be connected to SharePoint, maintaining the original while making it available read-only from within the SharePoint environment. And we use a tool called Business Connectivity Services to do that. And BCS, as it's known, allows us to read data from SQL Server or Oracle or PeopleSoft or SAP, or in some cases there's more customization, and in some cases custom code necessary. In other cases it's all point and click, and it allows you to bring that external data in. So I did want to very quickly give you a demo of that. If we take a look at this list here, when I go to display this employee list, you'll see that little green ball icon. That's actually SharePoint's wait icon, which you wouldn't normally see when it's accessing internal data. But the data that you're looking at here is actually stored in an external SQL Server database. Once that connection was made, an individual, the site owner, was able to say, I want to take that connection and make it available in this list. So here's a list of data that is stored in SQL Server, but being displayed in SharePoint as if it was part of that native SharePoint environment. And of course, this could be used in lookup tables. It can be used for creating reports, whatever is appropriate into your organization. So the BCS and the MMS both work together to be able to present data to your users in an easy-to-use way. And I think at this time, I'm going to wrap up the presentation and open the floor to some questions.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
Sure.
If you have any questions at this time, you can write them into the box. We do have a couple that we can field right now. Gary, have you ever migrated from Oracle's acquired Caligo document management to SharePoint?
Yes, I have, and I'm not going to mislead you into that it was a painless situation. I'm not saying that it's the most difficult thing in the world by any means, but depending on the level of migration and coexistence, is it a true, we're taking everything out of Oracle and throwing it into SharePoint? That's one level. In some cases, it's an integration. I just gave that very brief demo of the BCS, but that does give you some food for thought on, well, if I have all this data in Oracle, I really don't want to necessarily source it inside of SharePoint, but I need to give my SharePoint users access to it. So the BCS is one of those tools. Looking at the document management functionalities within Oracle, though, add a whole nother level of, shall we say, challenge to doing that migration to making it fully functional in a SharePoint document management functionality. In some cases, there's some functionality that's available in Oracle that's not available in the SharePoint environment, and vice versa. So, while I've been privy to both a small and a slightly larger migration, we certainly had some challenges there. I would highly recommend, getting appropriate advice. There's certainly many different channels to get that advice from.
Okay, thank you. Another question, can I manage a project with SharePoint integrated with Microsoft Project?
Not only can you do that, but 2 versions ago, Microsoft enhanced their project product to have their project server, which actually requires SharePoint now. So eliminate SharePoint out of the picture for a moment. Your organization decides that they want to bring in Project Server for all of the capabilities that it provides. When you install Project Server, it actually installs a version of SharePoint. Now, it's not the full-blown server version, but it is a version that supports sites and other things because Project Server requires SharePoint. So there's a high degree of integration there where not only can you get that out-of-the-box integration that you get when you install Project Server, but you can tell Project Server, hey, I already have SharePoint set up, don't bother installing another instance of it, and I want you to integrate in with this other already running version of SharePoint. So there's a high degree there. There are some resources out there that specialize in nothing but project management with SharePoint. If you want to reach out to your local DICES representative, I can easily get you some of those links to those individuals that provide that. There's books available. There's demos and other things that are available to show you how you can do project management within the SharePoint environment with Project Server.
Okay, next question. Is ECM a separate licensed product?
No, I didn't mean to mislead you in that it's an actual product. ECM is just one of those areas of functionality, that has nothing directly to do with SharePoint in that you can do ECM with many different tools and platforms. So enterprise content management is a piece of functionality, just like business intelligence. Now, the ECM capabilities of SharePoint are built into the server product. Now, SharePoint actually has 3 versions. Without getting too detailed, let me just give you the high level. there's a perfectly free version that you're entitled to use with every copy of Windows Server that you license. You can get a copy of what's called SharePoint Foundation. SharePoint Foundation has the base functionality of SharePoint, but it does not have the server functionality. There's a great link out on the Microsoft site. If you actually go to sharepoint.microsoft.com, there is, as a matter of fact, I think I have that in the no, I don't have it in the presentation, but feel free to reach out and we can provide those links. But at sharepoint.microsoft.com, there's a chart that shows you the difference in the versions. So in addition to the Foundation, which is totally free for every server that you own, there's the SharePoint Server that's not so free. That actually requires server licenses as well as CALs or client access licenses. And then there's a standard server version and an enterprise server version. So as a quick example, Excel services, the ability to host Excel files inside of SharePoint in that really nice interactive way in very secure read-only manner, that's an enterprise-only piece of functionality. However, things like the BCS, while they're not available in Foundation, are part of this standard server product. So it's really a matter of looking at what your organization's needs are and then being able to determine, well, gee, we really don't want to spend the extra money if we don't need to. Can we get by with the standard version, or is there an upgrade path? So there's multiple options that you would have there. And I would strongly encourage getting familiar with what exactly do I get with Enterprise and do I need to spend that money. In some cases, you may be better off getting the standard version and using a consulting company to come in and create that additional functionality where you only need one or two things that the enterprise version does. There's a lot of flexibility there.
Okay, next question. Can SharePoint integrate via XML to legacy business applications?
Absolutely. So SharePoint was built in .NET. If you're familiar from a development perspective with the .NET environment, this is what other ASPX-based sites, websites are built on, is the .NET environment. .NET, of course, works very well with XML. Because SharePoint's built in .NET, it too will work with XML. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with Microsoft's InfoPath product, InfoPath comes with the professional version of Office and allows you to create data entry forms. That integrates in a very deep way into the SharePoint environment, and InfoPath itself saves its data as an XML file. That XML file gets stored inside of SharePoint just as if it was a Word document or a PowerPoint document, but because it's XML, it can be configured to automatically launch the InfoPath form associated to it. If you're not using InfoPath, but you also want to consume XML, there are certainly plenty of other integration paths for that as well.
Okay, next question. Do you know of a conversion utility from SharePoint 2007 to SharePoint 2010?
Well, let's just say that there are several companies that make a pretty darn good living off of that. So at the highest level, your migration options are, don't spend any money on it at all and have your users log into their 2007 environment and copy and paste. There's a lot of major downsides to that. You don't get all the information, you're relying on the users, but you don't have any additional cost except your users' time. That's not a recommended way, but people have asked me, well, couldn't I just do it that way? Yeah, you could, but it's certainly not recommended. Then there's the idea of going out and purchasing a third-party tool. I don't mention any specific vendors. I'm vendor agnostic. You can certainly go ahead and Google SharePoint migration, and you'll see that there are plenty of vendors out there that sell a migration tool that make it easy for your administrators to go in and set it up and configure it. And in some cases, depending on how complex your 2007 environment is, you don't need to bring in an external consultant. Your internal resources can figure that out and do that migration themselves. Some of the things that don't migrate very well from the 07 to the 10 space is your branding or your look and feel. So if you did certain customizations with making SharePoint not look like SharePoint, or adding your custom logos or custom style sheets and things like that, they do not directly translate to 2010. excuse me. There's again lots of different options on how to migrate your branding, but they're not just out of the box point and click solutions there. One of the recommendations that we make when people are looking at moving from 2007 to 2010 is there's a site available out there called wssdemo.com. And it is a publicly accessible site that has links to thousands of SharePoint sites around the world that are publicly accessible, that you can go out and look at how are other organizations using SharePoint. And these are all 2010 sites. So what are they doing with it? How did they make it look and feel? And how are they potentially using it to present a public face of their company? It's a great resource that's free. It just takes your time and gives you some really good ideas about where you want to get to as you make your migration. Doing a phased approach is also another major recommendation when you're doing your migration, not to do it all at one time.
Great. All right, well, we're coming up on our hour here, so we have one more question.
Okay.
Can you recommend any books or resources for beginners who want to develop a SharePoint site?
So that's an interesting question, because when you say develop a SharePoint site, there's at least 3 different approaches or concepts to that. One is, I'm an end user. My company just gave me this site. They gave me the permissions to design it. What do I do? There's also the concept of, I'm a developer. I normally go out and develop websites, but now I need to go in and learn how to do that in SharePoint, either with or without code writing. And then there's that concept of, I'm an administrator. I don't really know anything about how to set all this stuff up, but I'm responsible for at least getting some of that base stuff set up. So there are, if you go to sharepoint.microsoft.com, there are some resources listed out there to some online videos. Now, they certainly will not replace actual training by any means, but they're a good starting point for, how do I stand up a standard SharePoint site, and what are some of my options? So hopefully that'll at least get you a kickstart in the right direction.
Great. Great. Thanks a lot, Gary. I just want to thank all of you for attending. We will be sending a link tomorrow to access the webinar. You can also access our other webinars from that link. That's all we have. So thanks again for attending, and hopefully you will consider attending our webinars to come. Thanks again, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.